Here's a bracket that goes right up into your original turn restrictors, and you might have to grind a little bit on the sides to get it to fit, because them welds could be a little different on every planter. Get you a Sharpie marker, run along there, draw your line, give you a good spot to grind. Also on this side over here. Okay, for the back carrier, you're going to take your tape measure, hook it right here on this plate of steel on the end of the tongue. You go 26 inches, mark your line, and you're going to take a square, and you're square that line down, give you a good nice square line. You're going to take your bracket, should come pre-installed with a spacer bolt just for welding purposes. You're going to hold this up and you're going to center this with that line. Some planters, it could be even right here on this bracket, or maybe a protruding just a tad bit. You're going to draw your line across there so you can get a good spot to grind. You're going to clean the paint up. Okay, here is the hose carrier, and to install it, get your front bracket tacked in here, and take this long tube, and it has to be parallel with the planter tongue. So the way that we done it was we set the planter tongue down and got it leveled with the driveway, laid a 4-foot level on this tube here, and then we set the main carrier frame up on jack stands, and we put a level on it to get it leveled, to make sure that this bracket here was welded correctly, and to make this tube parallel with the planter tube. The next dimension that's really important is this dimension right here from this planter tube. And from the center tube to that tube to the center pivot here is 10.5 inches. And you have to make sure that the tongue is in the fully extended position, so there's no slack, and all these stoppers are fully locked in and fully extended. The next dimension to look at is this dimension between this lock pivot. It should be around about 3/4 to 1 inch. And with everything set up on jack stands and parallel, this bracket should be around 26 inches, but you can slide it forward or backward to make your other numbers line up correctly. Another side note is, if this turn restrictor has ever been bent with the tractor duals getting into it, you may have to re-straighten this out to get this all to line up with the bracket. Another note to add is we actually removed the hose carrier box. We actually left it on, but you can either leave it on or take it off. But we took the original hose carrier box and removed it and laid all the hoses out on the driveway so you could still move the planter in and out. The next thing that you'll have to do is remove your whole sidewall with all your bulkheads and fittings in there. Take all those, remove all those, and put them all right back together again.
They cut this bracket here.
They was able to go all back together. And then you will have to take a torch and remove this bracket here that actually carried that sidewall. So in this position, the next important thing to look for is whenever you remove this bracket that you torch off here, this tube should clear this bracket that holds the main frame up. And on ours here, dimension is around 2 inches, but it does clear. And make sure that it clears and does not hit this brace here. The other tube should extend underneath, and it has to clear this deck. So that's the reason why the whole tube has to be parallel. and it clears by around a good 1.25 to 1.5 inches. Once you remove all the original hose carrier brackets, you should be left with this plate of steel on the planter. This bracket here with this U-bolt and angle iron should bolt right onto there, and make sure that it is pointing forward closer to this pivot bracket. The next thing would be to install this U-bolt, and start with the U-bolt about 1 inch from the planter tube, just enough to get your nut on there, and drill that and double nut that and bolt that U-bolt for the hoses to go through. And when you remove all your hose carriers, you may have some of these extra band clamps. We went ahead and bolted it right beside it. If you don't, you could possibly zip tie this to that also. The next important information is this bracket that carries the hoses here is actually one of the original brackets that held the plastic chain. So we removed all the poly brackets, took out all these bolts and removed the poly brackets, and we drilled a hole through this here and through the back wall, and I'll have some pictures to explain that. And we bolted it. This side hole is in one of the original holes from the round tube that was bolted down here to hold the floor. From the top it looks like this. This is your original hole. These two holes are the original hole. Then you'll need to drill this hole for the next one. And you want to, this bracket, when bolted into the original hole where the tube was at, turn it all the way up against the planter frame, and it'll actually hit up underneath the square tube and the sidewall. And that is where we drilled that second hole from the bottom. Bolt that bracket in, and all the holes will lay in that bracket, and this top bolt will just keep them in. We used another one of those original clamps to tie the electric harness here, and then you can also put some more zip ties to hold the harness there also. Once you have the hose carrier welded on the planter, the next job is to get your hoses lined out, and that is the hardest part of the whole project. The best way is to lay all your hoses on the ground, take all your hoses from your tractor, label all your ends, make sure everything's unhooked, even take your hoses off of your PTO pump, or if you have a direct coupled, lay it all out on the ground and stretch them all out. Then's the time to replace any hoses that looks like they need to be replaced. The hoses, some of them will be a little long. We actually made some new hoses, but we never shortened anything per se. But it will be kind of complicated on getting them twisted and lined correctly. The way that we got our hoses on the carrier was we run 1/2 inch hose on the bottom. The next 4 hoses are 5/8 hoses, and then we put one more 1/2 inch hose at the top on the inside. On the outside, we started with a 1/2 inch hose at the bottom, one more 5/8 hose. Your small case drain line hoses, there's 4 3/8 hoses, and we left the top to put the electrical wiring harness on the top. When you get up to the front of the tongue, everything goes off of the hoses, goes down and behind the square tubing and under the bottom and up around the hitch. On our application, we actually took the 2 hoses that are the actual remote hoses that goes to your number 1 circuit, and we actually mounted them rigid to the fan, oil cooler and fan mount, and we made new hoses and put 90-degree tube elbows, and that is what runs to our tractor. So we actually took the extra length of the hoses and come out from underneath the toolbar, went around and under the other side turn restrictor, back up and straight up to the oil cooler, and the 5/8 hoses that goes to your pump They actually come up and go up on top of the turn restrictor, make a circle, and we use the original hold down brackets that were originally made for the top carrier, which some planners has probably removed and lost, and clamped them to the side of the oil cooler. And then they run down and will hook to your PTO pump and off into your tractor remotes also. This hose here on the case drain, we just coiled it around, zip tied it here. Zip ties will definitely be your friend. Like I said, this is the time to replace your hoses. We replaced like 4 or 5 of our 5/8 hoses. They was all wore out. We actually do have a hydraulic shop, so it was very easy for us to make new hoses, but you need to take your hoses to a shop and get some new ones made if they look like they're wore out. The hoses on the table, we actually unbolted every hose in this original bracket, laid them all out, made a couple new ones, made sure all the hoses was through the original U-bolt on the main upper frame. We put most of the 5/8 hoses underneath and on the side, the small hoses on top, and again we left the electrical harness out so we can take it off and move it later, and then extra zip ties underneath. All bulkheads can be reused and everything should work there fine. When it comes to the nylon hose wrap, once you get everything all lined out, we started the nylon hose wrap as far as you could possibly get it up on the front half, and then secure it with the hook and loop, and then wrap a hook and loop strap around it to make it hold tighter. Run that all the way back through the box and remove this plate and put it on the back side of here. Put a couple more hook and loop straps to hold everything tight, and then we actually did fold over, had a little extra slack, we folded it back over itself and secured it with another hook and loop pull strap. Another item to note is the pins on the rear carrier. Make sure that the heads are on the inside so it's nice and smooth. Put your cotter keys at the top with your washers and your other one down at the bottom, so the heads are on the actual inside, so your hoses are actually rubbing on the heads of the pin and not your cotter keys. Once everything is installed, everything should look nice and neat. Your hoses should be on the inside. Everything should be nice and flat, nothing to catch. Make sure your hoses are not anywhere that they could catch. If you have any problems, don't hesitate to call. We will definitely help you out, talk you through every step that we did.